The view from the 45th floor of the Sterling Tower was flawless, a panorama of Chicago steel and ambition that Julian had conquered piece by piece. But the silence of his office was shattered not by a sound, but by a single name on a resume that dragged him back to the cramped apartment where his marriage ended in a whisper. Some scars don't fade, they just get covered by bespoke suits and seven-figure bank accounts. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet, devastating moments where the past collides with the present, stay with me as we unravel this. The rain in Chicago had a way of blurring the world, turning the sharp lines of the skyscrapers into streaks of gray and charcoal. From the 45th floor of the Sterling Tower, Julian watched the storm batter the glass. It was a violent, chaotic mess outside, but in here, everything was climate-controlled, silent, and expensive. He turned away from the window, the leather of his shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. His office was a testament to minimalism. Mahogany desk, Eames chair, and a single abstract painting that had cost more than the house he grew up in. "Mr. Sterling?" The voice came from the intercom on his desk. It was Nora, his current head of HR. "The shortlist for the executive assistant position is on your tablet. We've narrowed it down to 3. We need your sign-off before the final interviews tomorrow." "Thank you, Nora. I'll review them now." Julian sat down, loosening his tie just an inch. It was late, nearly 8 p.m. Most of the staff had gone home to their families, their dinners, their warm, messy lives. Julian stayed. He always stayed. The empire he built required maintenance, and frankly, the silence of the office was easier to navigate than the silence of his penthouse. He swiped through the first 2 profiles. Impressive. Ivy League degrees, impeccable references, young, hungry. They were perfect on paper. He was about to approve the first candidate, a bright kid from Yale, when his finger froze on the 3rd file. Elena Vance. The name didn't scream at him. It didn't flash in red. It just sat there in standard 12-point Helvetica font, unassuming and ordinary. But Julian felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been punched in the solar plexus. He zoomed in on the photo. She looked older. That was his first thought. The 7 years had stripped away the soft, glowing arrogance she used to wear like a second skin. Her eyes, once bright with the promise of a better life, a life she hadn't thought Julian could give her, looked tired. There were fine lines around her mouth, and her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun. He read the resume. It was a tragedy written in bullet points. Administrative assistant at a logistics firm, laid off. Receptionist at a dental clinic. Gap in employment, 2 years. No mention of Marcus. No mention of the high society life she had left him for. No mention of the nights she spent telling Julian that his architectural sketches were cute but wouldn't pay the electric bill. "I need security, Julian," she had said that last night, standing by the door with her Louis Vuitton bag, a gift from Marcus. "I can't wait for you to become someone you're not." Julian closed his eyes, the memory sharp enough to cut. He touched the scar on his emotional memory, testing it for pain. It used to burn. Now it just felt like a cold, dull weight. Why was she applying here? The company name, Sterling Architecture, was plastered on every construction site in the Midwest. Did she know? Or was she so desperate, so removed from his world, that she was sending resumes into the void, praying for a paycheck? He looked at the address on her file, a small apartment in a run-down district on the south side, far from the Gold Coast penthouses Marcus used to frequent. Julian stood up and walked back to the window. The city lights were flickering on through the rain. He had a choice. He could delete the file. Nora would never know. Elena would receive a generic rejection email, and he would never have to see her face again. He could go back to his scotch and his blueprints and his flawless, lonely success. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. It is a hunger that logic cannot starve. He pressed the intercom button. "Nora?" "Still here, sir." "The 3rd candidate, Elena Vance." "Oh yes, she's a bit underqualified compared to the others, and the employment gap is concerning. I put her in as a wild card, but I can cut her if—" "No," Julian said, his voice steady, betraying nothing of the storm inside him. "Schedule her for 9 a.m. tomorrow." "For an interview with the HR team?" "No," Julian said, watching his own reflection in the darkened glass. "Send her directly to me. The lobby of the Sterling Tower smelled of white tea and intimidation. Elena smoothed the front of her skirt for the 10th time, her palms damp against the cheap polyester blend. It was a suit she had bought at a thrift store in Pilsen, a charcoal gray that had looked professional in the dim lighting of her apartment, but now looked weary under the unforgiving halogen glare of the corporate atrium. She checked her watch. 8:50 a.m. Her stomach twisted. She needed this. Her bank account was overdrawn by $40, and her landlord had stopped accepting her excuses a week ago. When the recruiter told her she had an interview with the CEO of Sterling Architecture, Elena had almost laughed. It felt like a clerical error. Why would a firm responsible for the city's new skyline want a woman whose last reference was a dental clinic manager named Brenda? Ms. Vance? A polished young woman with a tablet approached her. She looked like everything Elena used to be. Confident, radiant, expensive. Yes, that's me. Elena stood up, clutching her worn leather portfolio. Mr. Sterling will see you now. Top floor. Sterling, the name had nagged at her when she applied, a faint echo of a life she had buried. But Julian had been a dreamer, an artist who sketched on napkins and talked about light and shadow while their electricity was cut off. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a man who owned a 40-story monolith in the Loop. It was a common name, she had told herself. A coincidence. The elevator ride was a silent ascent that made her ears pop. When the doors slid open on the 45th floor, the silence was absolute. It wasn't the quiet of emptiness. It was the heavy, muffled quiet of serious money. Through the double doors at the end, the assistant said, not bothering to look up from her desk. Elena walked down the long corridor. The floor was polished concrete, cold and industrial. Her heels clicked too loudly, announcing her intrusion with every step. She reached the heavy glass doors, took a breath that shuddered in her chest, and knocked. Enter. The voice was deep, baritone, and terrifyingly familiar. Elena pushed the door open. The office was vast, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that held the gray Chicago sky in a chokehold. A man stood with his back to her, looking out at the city. He wore a navy suit that fit him with architectural precision. He turned slowly. The air left the room. Elena felt her knees lock, her hand gripping the door handle so hard her knuckles turned white. It was him. But it wasn't the Julian she had left in that cramped hallway 7 years ago. That Julian had slumped shoulders and eyes full of pleading. This man was harder. His face had thinned, the angles sharper, his jawline set in stone. His hair was shorter, styled with a severity that matched the room. He looked at her not with anger, but with a terrifying blank neutrality. Have a seat, Elena, Julian said. He didn't say Ms. Vance. He used her first name, stripping away the professional buffer immediately. Elena couldn't move. Her instinct screamed at her to run, to turn around and sprint back to the elevator, to vanish into the rain and never look back. The shame was a physical heat rising up her neck. She had left him because he was nothing. And now she was standing in his empire asking for scraps. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat, forcing herself to look at him. I didn't know this was you. Does it matter? Julian walked to his desk and sat down, gesturing to the empty chair opposite him. You applied for a job. I have a vacancy. Elena took a step forward, her legs trembling. She sat in the chair. It was low, lower than his, forcing her to look up at him. Julian, Mr. Sterling, he corrected, his voice devoid of malice but firm as steel. In this building, it is Mr. Sterling, and we are here to discuss your qualifications, which, according to this, he picked up her resume, holding it by the corner as if it were contaminated, are somewhat scattered. He dropped the paper on the desk. It landed with a soft slap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Why should I hire you? He asked, leaning back, his eyes drilling into hers. Elena looked at his hands, the same hands that used to hold hers when she cried about her dead-end life. Now they were clasped over a Mont Blanc pen. She realized then that there was no mercy in this room. There was only a transaction. Because I need the money, Elena whispered, the truth slipping out before she could polish it. Julian didn't blink. Honesty. That's a start, but honesty doesn't run a calendar or manage confidential files. He tilted his head slightly. Are you capable of being invisible, Ms. Vance? because that is what this job requires. Silence, discretion, and the ability to anticipate needs before they are spoken. I can do that, she said, her voice stronger now, fueled by the sheer necessity of survival. I can work hard. I won't cause problems. Julian stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. He was dissecting her, peeling back the layers of her pathetic suit and her weary eyes to see the woman who had once broken him. We start at 7 o'clock a.m., Julian said, turning his attention back to his computer screen, dismissing her while she was still sitting there. Don't be late. Elena sat frozen for a second, unsure if it was over. Then she stood up, her legs feeling like jelly. Thank you, she breathed. He didn't look up. Close the door on your way out. Nora, the HR director, did not try to hide her confusion as she slid the contract across the glass table. The conference room on the 44th floor was clinically bright, a stark contrast to the shadowy tension of Julian's office upstairs. Standard non-disclosure agreement, Nora said, her pen tapping rhythmically against her tablet. Code of conduct, intellectual property rights, and the compensation package. Elena looked at the numbers on the final page. Her breath hitched. The salary was standard for a high-level executive assistant in Chicago, but to Elena, who had been rationing instant coffee and dodging landlord calls for 6 months, it looked like a fortune. It was enough to clear her debts. It was enough to buy freedom. But the cost was sitting 40 feet above her head. Is there a problem with the offer? Nora asked, her eyebrows arching. She clearly couldn't understand why a woman with a resume full of holes was hesitating over a golden ticket. No, Elena said quietly. It's generous. Mr. Sterling insisted on the standard rate. He didn't want to adjust for your gap years. Nora's tone suggested she would have done exactly that. Elena picked up the pen. Her hand shook just a fraction. Signing this paper felt less like accepting a job and more like signing a confession. She was selling her hours, her silence, and her pride to the man she had once told wasn't good enough. She pressed the tip to the paper and signed Elena Vance. Upstairs, Julian stood by the window, watching the street below. He held a tumbler of sparkling water, the bubbles rising and bursting in silence. He knew exactly what he was doing, or at least he told himself he did. Hiring her wasn't charity. Charity was for people you pitied, and he didn't pity Elena. Pity implied emotional connection. This was an autopsy. He wanted to see if the woman who had haunted his insecurities for 7 years still held any power over him. He wanted to look at her every day, watch her fetch coffee and file blueprints, and prove to himself that she was just another employee, just another person on the payroll. If he could look at her and feel nothing, then he had truly won. His phone buzzed. A message from Nora. She signed. Start date, immediate. Julian set the glass down. A dark, cold satisfaction settled in his chest. The next morning, the city was still waking up when Elena swiped her new keycard at the lobby turnstile. 6:45 a.m. The security guard nodded at her, indifferent. To him, she was just another suit in the ant farm. The elevator ride up was nauseating. When the doors opened, the office was dim, lit only by the emergency lights and the glow of the server rooms. She made her way to the desk outside Julian's office. It was a sleek, curved station made of white marble, positioned like a gatekeeper to his sanctuary. On the desk, a single sticky note waited for her. Coffee, black, no sugar. 7 o'clock a.m. sharp. It was his handwriting, the same jagged architectural scrawl she used to see on the back of overdue notices, scribbling plans for the future. Now, the future was here, and her role in it was to bring him caffeine. Elena placed her bag down and went to the kitchenette. Her hands moved mechanically. Grind the beans, pour the water. Wait. The smell of the coffee was rich and bitter, filling the silent floor. At 6:59 a.m., she knocked on his door. Come in. Julian was already working. He had 3 monitors set up, displaying complex CAD drawings of a suspension bridge. He didn't look up as she entered. He was wearing a crisp white shirt, cuffs rolled up to his elbows, revealing the forearms she used to trace with her fingertips on lazy Sunday mornings. She walked to the desk and set the cup down on a coaster. She was careful not to let the ceramic click against the wood. Good morning, Mr. Sterling, she said. Julian rotated his mouse, zooming in on a strut detail. He took a sip of the coffee without looking at her. The schedule for the day is in your inbox, he said, his voice flat. I need the Smithson files organized by date before the 10 a.m. partner meeting. And Elena? She froze halfway to the door. Yes? Finally, he looked up. His eyes were cool, devoid of any warmth, any shared history. He looked at her like she was a piece of office equipment that had malfunctioned slightly. My coffee, he said. It's lukewarm. Ensure it is hot next time. Elena felt the flush rise in her cheeks. It was a petty complaint. It was a power move, and she had no choice but to take it. I'm sorry, sir, she said, her voice tight. I'll make a fresh pot. Don't bother, just get to work. He turned back to his screens. Elena walked out, closing the door softly behind her, realizing that the man she left was dead. The man in that room was a stranger, and he intended to make her pay for every cent of that salary. 3 weeks into the realm, Elena realized that the silence was the loudest part of the Sterling Tower. She had become efficient. She learned that Julian preferred his correspondence summarized in 3 bullet points, not 5. She learned that he took his lunch at his desk, usually a salmon salad he barely touched, and that he hated being interrupted between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. She became the ghost he asked for, a silent mechanism that kept his world turning while she remained invisible. But invisibility was impossible when the walls were made of glass. From her desk, she had a direct line of sight into his office. She watched him command rooms full of older, wealthier men. She watched him point to blueprints with a decisiveness that the old Julian never possessed. The Julian she knew had been full of hesitation, constantly asking her, "Do you think this is good enough, Elle?" This man didn't ask. He declared. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the reality of her loss truly hit her. Julian was leading a strategy meeting with a team of structural engineers. Elena was in the corner, taking minutes. The load-bearing capacity isn't the issue, Julian said, his voice cutting through the mumbled excuses of a senior engineer. He stood up, walking to the whiteboard. The issue is the aesthetic integration. If we thicken these columns, we lose the light. And I am not building a bunker. I am building a beacon. The room went quiet. He commanded their respect effortlessly. Elena looked down at her tablet, her fingers hovering over the screen. She remembered a night 8 years ago when he had cried in her lap because a client had rejected his design. She had stroked his hair and thought, he's too weak for this world. She had been wrong. He wasn't weak. He was just waiting to harden, and she was the fire that had hardened him. The meeting dispersed and the engineers filed out, looking suitably chastised. Elena stayed behind to gather the empty water bottles and clear the table. Leave it, Julian said. He was standing by the window adjusting his cufflinks. It's part of my job, Mr. Sterling. The cleaning crew comes at 6. Leave it. Elena froze, a half-empty bottle in her hand. She set it down. Yes, sir. She turned to leave, but he moved toward his desk, passing within inches of her. The air shifted. It was his scent, sandalwood, cedar, and something sharp like crushed pine needles. It was the same scent he had worn on their wedding day, but back then it was a cheap drugstore imitation. Now it was the real thing, rich and lingering. The smell triggered a visceral memory, his face buried in her neck. Sunday mornings, the weight of his body. Her breath hitched, a tiny traitorous sound in the quiet room. Julian stopped. He didn't turn around, but his posture stiffened. He heard it. Is there something else, Ms. Vance? The formality was a slap in the face. Ms. Vance. Not Elena. Not Elle. No, she whispered. I forgot to check if you needed the car for the gala on Friday. My driver handles that. You don't need to concern yourself with my personal itinerary. Right, of course. She walked to the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. Elena! The use of her name stopped her dead. She turned, hope flaring in her chest against her will. Julian was looking at her, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark and impenetrable. Your hair, he said. She instinctively touched the severe bun at the nape of her neck. Is it unprofessional? No, Julian said, turning back to his computer, dismissing her once again. It's just different. You used to wear it down. The comment hung in the air, suspended between cruelty and nostalgia. He remembered. He noticed. And he wanted her to know that he noticed, not because he cared, but because he wanted her to feel the distance between who she was then and who she was now. That was a long time ago, Mr. Sterling, she said. her voice steady despite the pounding in her ears. Yes, he replied, the click of his mouse punctuating the sentence. It was. Elena walked out, the glass door sliding shut behind her, sealing him in his tower and leaving her on the outside, exactly where she chose to be 7 years ago. Information in a corporate high-rise travels faster than light, and it is far more destructive. For the first month, Elena had been a ghost, the quiet woman in the cheap suit who managed the CEO's calendar. But ghosts don't stay buried forever, especially not in the digital age. It started on a Thursday, just before lunch. Elena walked into the break room to refill the water pitcher for the conference room. Usually the junior associates would offer a polite, dismissive nod. Today the room went dead silent. 3 young architects were huddled around a tablet at the high-top table. When Elena entered, they scattered like roaches caught in a sudden light, but not fast enough. One of them, a sharply dressed associate named Chloe, didn't bother to hide the smirk playing on her lips. Elena kept her head down, her heart hammering a warning rhythm against her ribs. She moved to the water cooler, feeling their eyes on her back. They were burning. "I mean, look at the diamonds," a male voice whispered, barely audible but intended to be heard. "Hard to believe that's the same person." "Karma is a bitch," Chloe whispered back. Elena's hands slipped. The water overflowed the pitcher, splashing onto her wrist and the floor. She gasped, pulling back, and the sound of her clumsiness seemed to echo in the hostile silence. She turned around. The tablet was still open on the table. It wasn't a secret dossier. It was a Google search result, an archived article from Chicago Social Magazine, dated 5 years ago. The headline screamed in bold serif font, "The Fall of the Vance Empire, How Marcus Vance and His Trophy Wife Lost It All." The photo accompanying the article was of Elena, but it was the old Elena. She was wearing a backless emerald gown, holding a champagne flute, laughing with her head thrown back, draped on Marcus's arm. She looked arrogant, beautiful, and untouchable, contrasted with the woman standing in the break room, wet sleeve, fraying hem, dark circles under her eyes. The image was a brutal joke. "Can I help you with something?" Elena asked, her voice trembling, despite her best effort to sound authoritative. Chloe picked up her coffee, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "No, Elena, we were just admiring your previous work experience. Didn't know we had Chicago royalty fetching our water." The shame hit Elena like a physical blow. It wasn't just that they knew she was poor now. It was that they knew she had been bought and sold, and the buyer had gone bankrupt. She was the failed investment standing in the middle of a billion-dollar firm. "Is there a problem here?" The voice sliced through the tension like a scalpel. Julian stood in the doorway. He didn't look angry. He looked bored, which was somehow worse. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, staring at the group of associates. "Mr. Sterling," Chloe stammered, the smirk vanishing instantly. You were just wasting billable hours," Julian finished. He walked over to the table and looked down at the tablet. He stared at the photo of his ex-wife and her lover for a long, uncomfortably silent second. Elena held her breath. She waited for him to defend her. She waited for him to say that she was more than that photo, that she was hardworking, that she was human. Julian swiped the screen off. "Gossip is for people who don't have enough work to do," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous chill. "If I find you discussing the personal lives of my staff again, you can discuss your severance packages instead. That clear?" "Yes, sir," the group chorused, terrified. "Get out!" They scrambled out of the room, leaving Elena and Julian alone in the hum of the refrigerator and the dripping water. Elena gripped the pitcher, her knuckles white. "Thank you, Julian. Mr. Sterling," he corrected her, not looking at her. He was looking at the puddle of water on the floor. "Mr. Sterling," she whispered, "thank you for defending me." He finally looked at her. His eyes were cold, detached. "I didn't defend you, Elena. I protected the office environment. Disruptions cost money." He stepped closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look up at him. "And do me a favor," he added, his voice low and devoid of pity. "Don't give them ammunition. You're not the socialite in that picture anymore. Stop acting like a victim and start doing your job. The conference room needs water. Now." He turned and walked, away, leaving her standing there with the ghost of her past staring up from the black screen of the tablet. He hadn't saved her. He had just reminded her that in his building, she was nothing more than a utility, and a malfunctioning one at that. The grand atrium of the Sterling Tower had been transformed into a cathedral of light. 20-foot silk banners hung from the steel rafters, and a live orchestra played something classical and expensive in the corner. It was the annual Skyline Ball, the night when Chicago's elite gathered to worship at the altar of architecture and money. Elena stood by the VIP entrance, clutching a digital tablet against her chest. She wasn't wearing an evening gown. She was wearing the event staff uniform, a severe black sheath dress, sensible heels, and a headset that buzzed with logistical chatter. "Champagne shortage at bar 3, a voice crackled in her ear. "Vance, get on it." "Copy," Elena whispered, her throat dry. 7 years ago, she would have been the one complaining about the champagne. She would have been on the other side of the velvet rope, wearing Vera Wang, holding court, laughing at jokes she didn't understand just to feel important. Now she was the help. The irony wasn't lost on her. It was a heavy stone in her stomach. She moved through the crowd, invisible. That was the superpower of the service staff. People looked right through you. She dodged tray-wielding waiters and skirted around groups of developers discussing zoning laws. Then the room shifted. The air pressure seemed to drop, drawing everyone's attention toward the main staircase. The orchestra swelled. Julian had arrived. He descended the stairs with the easy grace of a man who owns the ground he walks on. His tuxedo was midnight blue, cut impeccably to his frame. He looked regal, untouchable, the architect of his own destiny. But he wasn't alone. On his arm was a woman. She wasn't a 20-something model. She was elegant, perhaps late 30s, wearing a silver gown that shimmered like liquid mercury. She had an intelligent face, sharp eyes, and a confident posture. She didn't hang on Julian like an accessory. She walked beside him as an equal. Elena froze behind a pillar, her breath catching. She watched as they reached the bottom of the stairs. A donor approached them. Julian smiled, a genuine, warm smile that Elena hadn't seen in a decade, and leaned in to whisper something to the woman. She laughed, a low, throaty sound, and placed a hand on his forearm. It wasn't possessive, it was reassuring. It was the touch of a partner who knew the man behind the suit. "Who is that?" a junior architect whispered to a colleague near Elena. "That's Dr. Claire Hastings," the colleague replied, "curator of the Modern Art Institute. Rumor is they're shopping for rings." Shopping for rings. The words hit Elena like shrapnel. She felt a wave of nausea so strong she had to grip the marble pillar to stay upright. She had left Julian because she thought he couldn't give her the world. Now he was giving it to someone else, someone who clearly appreciated the man, not just the wallet. "Elena!" She snapped her head up. Julian was standing 10 feet away. He had stepped away from the crowd, his eyes locking onto hers in the shadows. For a moment, she thought he might come over, might acknowledge the bizarre cruelty of this moment. His ex-wife working the door at his triumph. He signaled to her. It was a small, curt gesture. "Come here." Elena walked over, her legs feeling like lead. She kept her eyes lowered, unable to look at the woman standing beside him. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My cufflink," Julian said, holding out his left wrist. The silver bar had come undone. Fix it. It was a task for a valet or a wife, but he was asking his assistant. Elena's hands trembled as she reached out. She touched the expensive fabric of his shirt, the warmth of his skin radiating against her cold fingertips. She fumbled with the clasp, her heart pounding so loud she feared the microphone on her headset would pick it up. "You're shaking," Julian noted quietly. It's cold in here, sir," she lied. She snapped the cufflink into place and pulled her hands away as if burned. "Thank you," Julian said. He didn't look at her face. He looked at Claire. "Ready?" "Always," Claire said, smiling at him. She glanced at Elena, offering a polite, oblivious nod. "Thank you, dear." They turned and walked away, disappearing into the swirl of music and laughter. Elena stood alone in the wake of their perfection, feeling small, cheap, and utterly discarded. She realized then that Julian hadn't asked her to fix the cufflink because he needed help. He had done it to remind her of her place. She was no longer the woman he loved. She was just a pair of hands he paid to fix the things he didn't have time for. The last guest had departed at 1:00 a.m. The cleaning crews were already swarming the lobby like silent beetles, erasing the evidence of the night's excess. Elena took the service elevator up to the 45th floor to return the event manifest and the master keys. She expected the office to be empty. She expected darkness. Instead, a single lamp burned on the mahogany desk. Julian was there, stripped of his tuxedo jacket, his tie undone and hanging loose around his neck. He held a glass of amber liquid, staring out at the city lights that burned below like a sea of embers. Elena stood into the doorway, the manifest clutching in her hand. She should drop it on the assistant's desk and leave. She should run. But the image of him with Claire, the easy laughter, the shared intimacy, had been eating at her insides for 4 hours. It was a corrosive acid that dissolved her resolve. "I thought you left with her," Elena said. Her voice was thin, startling herself in the quiet. Julian didn't turn around. He took a slow sip of his drink. "I had work to finish. Claire understands that. She doesn't need me to hold her hand every second." The comparison was unspoken but deafening. "She isn't needy like you were." Elena walked into the room. Her feet hurt. Her soul hurt. She placed the keys on his desk with a soft clink. "She's beautiful, Julian. She fits this life." "Yes," Julian said simply. "She does." He turned then, leaning back against the window frame. His face was shadowed, his expression unreadable. "Go home, Elena. You look exhausted." "I can't go home," she whispered, the dam finally cracking. "I go home to a box with peeling paint and a radiator that screams all night. I go home and I think about how I used to complain that our apartment in Wicker Park was too small." "We all make choices," Julian said coldly. "You chose Marcus. You chose the penthouse on the Gold Coast. I assume the heating was better there." "He left me, Julian." The confession ripped out of her, ragged and desperate. She took a step toward him, her hands trembling. "He left me the moment the money ran out. He looked at me like I was a bad investment and traded me in for a 22-year-old model. I lost everything. I have nothing." Julian didn't move. He didn't offer a tissue. He didn't offer comfort. He just watched her unravel with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a specimen. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm sorry," she sobbed, the tears finally spilling over, hot and humiliating. "I'm so sorry. I was young and I was stupid and I was greedy. I thought love wasn't enough." She closed the distance between them. It was a dangerous, reckless move. She reached out and touched his hand, the hand holding the glass. His skin was warm. "I see you now, Julian," she pleaded, looking up into his eyes, searching for a flicker of the boy who used to worship her. "I see the man you've become, and I know, I know I still love you. I never stopped. I just got lost." The room went deadly silent. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette seemed to roar. Elena leaned in, her breath hitching. "Please, tell me you don't feel it. Tell me you don't remember us." She waited, a second, 2 seconds, an eternity. She waited for him to pull her into his arms, to tell her that forgiveness was possible, that the nightmare of the last 7 years could be washed away with one kiss. Julian looked down at her hand covering his. He didn't pull away immediately. He let the moment hang there, heavy with the ghosts of their marriage. "I remember us, Elena," he said softly, his voice low and intimate. Hope flared in her chest, a blinding, painful light. "I remember everything, he continued. "I remember how you looked at me when I couldn't pay for dinner. I remember the note you left on the counter, and I remember the sound of the door closing." He gently but firmly removed her hand from his. Julian stepped back, creating a physical chasm between them that felt wider than the office itself. He placed his glass on the desk, the sound of crystal against mahogany signaling the end of the conversation. "You don't love me, Elena," he said, his voice steady, devoid of the passion she was desperate to provoke. "You love the safety. You love the idea that you can hit rewind and undo the last 7 years. But life isn't a drafting table. You can't just erase the lines that didn't work out. Elena wiped her cheeks, her mascara smudged, ruining the professional mask she had worn so carefully for weeks. That's not fair. I made a mistake. People forgive mistakes. I have forgiven you, Julian said. And when she looked into his eyes, she saw that it was true. There was no hatred there. There was no fire. There was only a calm, vast emptiness where his adoration used to be. I forgave you years ago. Holding on to hate was too heavy, and I had a company to build. He walked back to the window, turning his profile to her. But forgiveness doesn't mean restoration. The man you left, the one who needed you, the one who defined his worth by your approval, he died in that apartment. I am not him. I am someone else entirely. And this man? He gestured vaguely to the office, the suit, the city below. This man doesn't need you. The words were spoken softly, but they crushed her more effectively than any shout could have. It was the ultimate rejection. He wasn't punishing her. He had simply outgrown her. She was a chapter in a book he had finished reading a long time ago. Elena stood there, the silence stretching out, filling with the realization of her own foolishness. She had thought this was a romance. She had thought this was a story about second chances. But it was a story about consequences. I can't work here, she whispered. The reality settled on her shoulders, heavy and cold. I can't see you every day knowing this. I know, Julian said. He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't offer to transfer her. He accepted her resignation as a necessary structural correction. Nora will handle your severance. You'll be paid through the end of the month. It will give you time to find something more suitable. Elena nodded. She felt hollowed out, scraped clean of hope. But strangely, the panic was gone. The worst had happened. She had faced him, she had begged, and she had been denied. There was nothing left to fear. Goodbye, Julian, she said. Goodbye, Elena. She turned and walked to the door. She didn't look back. The click of the latch engaging behind her was the final punctuation mark on their marriage. Julian didn't watch her leave. He kept his eyes on the city. The rain had stopped, and the clouds were breaking, revealing the grid of Chicago lights below. Amber, white, and red, pulsing like a living organism. He took a deep breath. The air in the office felt different, lighter. For 7 years, he had built this tower to prove something to a ghost. He had driven himself to the brink of exhaustion to answer a question that no longer mattered. Now, the ghost was gone. The office was just an office. The success was just success. He looked at his reflection in the glass. He straightened his tie, picked up his phone, and sent a text to Claire. Heading home. Save me a glass of wine. He turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, and walked out of the door, leaving the past locked in the shadows behind him.